Blood pooled beneath the surgical lights as 40 bullet casings clattered into a steel tray. The Navy SEAL's heart had stopped twice. The surgeon was stuck in traffic, and 23-year-old nurse Maya Rodriguez was wrist-deep in a chest cavity she had no authorization to open. Her hands moved like lightning: clamp, extract, suture, repeat. When his pulse finally steadied, she thought she'd saved a hero's life. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours she'd be escorted out by security, badge confiscated, career destroyed. Because sometimes the system punishes those who refuse to let people die. If you want to see how this story ends, stay with me until the very last second, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels around the world. The emergency bay doors exploded inward at 11:47 p.m., and Maya Rodriguez knew immediately this wasn't a normal trauma case. The black SUV that screeched to a halt had no plates, no hospital markings, just government-grade tint, and two men in tactical gear flanking a gurney. The man on it was massive, easily 240 pounds of muscle, and covered in so much blood that his tactical vest looked like it had been dipped in paint. "GSW times 40, one of the agents barked, not looking at Maya, not looking at anyone. "Tier 1 operator. If he dies, you'll answer to people you don't want to meet." Maya's pulse kicked into overdrive, but her voice stayed level. "Get him to Trauma 1. I need vitals, 2 large-bore IVs, and someone page Dr. Garrison now." The gurney wheels screamed across the polished floor. Maya ran alongside it, her sneakers squeaking with each stride. She'd been an ER nurse at Clearwater Memorial in Tampa for 18 months, and she'd seen gunshot wounds before. But 40 rounds? That wasn't a shooting. That was an execution attempt. In Trauma 1, the overhead lights blazed like an interrogation room. The operator's chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate gasps. Maya's hands moved on autopilot, cutting through the Kevlar vest with trauma shears, exposing a torso that looked like a battlefield. Entry wounds peppered his shoulders, abdomen, ribs. Some still bled. Others had already clotted into dark, angry circles. "Pressure's dropping," called out Tim Chen from the monitors. 90/50 and falling." Maya's jaw tightened. "Where's Garrison?" The charge nurse, Angela, appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear, face pale. "Stuck on the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Bridge accident. He's at least 40 minutes out." 40 minutes? Maya's voice cracked. "He'll be dead in 10. Angela's eyes darted to the two agents standing just outside the trauma bay, arms crossed, expressions unreadable. "Maya, you can't—" "I'm not letting him die because of traffic. You're not a surgeon. I assisted in field extractions during my deployment rotation. I know what I'm doing." That was partially true. Maya had spent 6 months with a medical unit attached to an Army forward operating base before nursing school. She'd seen combat medics do impossible things with limited resources. But that was triage, not surgery. This was a hospital with protocols, hierarchies, liability concerns. None of that mattered when she looked at the operator's face, young, maybe 30, with a scar along his jawline and blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Prep the field surgical kit," Maya said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "And get me O-negative blood, 4 units, now." Tim hesitated. Angela opened her mouth to protest, but something in Maya's tone, the absolute certainty that came from having already made the decision, stopped them both. They moved. The agent stepped closer to the window. One of them spoke into a radio, words too low to hear. Maya ignored them. She scrubbed her hands with chlorhexidine, her mind racing through the procedures she'd memorized, the videos she'd studied, the surgeries she'd only ever assisted with. The operator's breathing was getting shallower. His lips were turning blue. "Gloves," Maya said, and Angela snapped them on her hands. The first bullet was lodged in his left shoulder, just above the clavicle. Maya made a small incision, her hand steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. The scalpel cut clean. She used hemostats to widen the wound, then forceps to grip the deformed slug. It came out with a wet sucking sound and clinked into the steel tray. 1 down, 39 to go. "Pressure's at 85/48, Tim called out. "Hang the blood, push fluids." Maya's voice was calm, clinical, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The second bullet was deeper, buried in the thick muscle of his right pectoral. She could feel it under her fingertips, a hard knot beneath torn tissue. This one required more work, careful dissection to avoid the subclavian artery. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Angela dabbed it away without being asked. The bullet came free. 2 down. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. Maya worked in a bubble of pure focus, her entire world reduced to blood, metal, and the stubborn rhythm of the operator's heart. She found bullets in his abdomen, his thighs, his ribs. Some were shallow. Others had gone deep, glancing off bone, tearing through muscle. At bullet number 17, the monitor screamed. "He's in VFib!" Tim shouted. Maya grabbed the defibrillator paddles. "Clear!" The operator's body arched off the table. The monitor shrieked, then settled into a chaotic rhythm before flatlining completely. "Again, clear!" This time, a single blip appeared on the monitor. Then another. Then a steady, fragile pulse. "You've got him back," Angela whispered, her own hands shaking now. Maya didn't pause. She went back to work, her movements mechanical, precise. Bullet 18, 19, 20. Each one that came out felt like a small victory, a theft from death itself. The steel tray filled with misshapen metal, evidence of a fight that should have killed him 10 times over. At bullet 32, his blood pressure spiked, then plummeted again. "He's bleeding internally," Maya said, her voice tight. "Probable liver laceration from the rounds in his lower right quadrant." She packed the wound with gauze, applied pressure, prayed it would hold. The liver was a vascular nightmare. One wrong move and he'd bleed out faster than they could transfuse him. But leaving the bullets in wasn't an option. They were foreign bodies, each one a potential source of infection, toxicity, further damage. Bullet 38 came from his left thigh, nicking the femoral artery. Blood sprayed across Maya's scrubs. She clamped the vessel with lightning speed, her training overriding her panic. Angela handed her sutures before she even asked. 2 more, Maya muttered, almost to herself. Just 2 more. Bullet 39 was embedded in his right hip, wedged against the iliac crest. It took 5 minutes of careful extraction to get it out without shattering bone. Maya's fingers ached, her back screamed. She ignored both. The final bullet was the worst. It had entered just below his sternum and traveled upward, lodging near his heart. Maya could see it on the portable X-ray Angela had taken, a bright white dot sitting millimeters from the pericardium. "Maya, that's too close," Angela whispered. "If you nick the sac—" "I know." She made the incision smaller than a dime, using a microforceps designed for removing shrapnel. Her hand didn't shake. It couldn't. One tremor, one slip, and she'd puncture the membrane surrounding his heart. He'd die in seconds. The forceps closed around the bullet. Maya pulled. It came free. She dropped it into the tray with the others, 40 pieces of metal that had failed to kill a man who refused to die. "Pressure's stabilizing," Tim said, and there was awe in his voice. 95/60, heart rate steady at 98. Maya stepped back from the table, her gloves slick with blood. The operator's chest rose and fell in deep, even breaths. His color was returning. Against every statistical probability, he was alive. The agents were inside the trauma bay now, one of them speaking rapidly into his phone. The other approached Maya, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses that had no business being worn indoors at midnight. "Is he stable?" the agent asked. "For now," Maya said, "but he needs a surgeon to close properly, imaging to check for internal bleeding, and at least a week in ICU." The agent nodded once. "You did good, Nurse Rodriguez." Then they were gone, wheeling the operator toward the elevators that led to the surgical wing. Maya watched them disappear, her legs suddenly unsteady. She gripped the edge of the table. "That was insane," Tim said, staring at the tray of bullets like it was an artifact from another world. "You just performed surgery, actual surgery." Angela was quiet, her face pale. "Maya, you know they're going to review this." "Let them review it," Maya said, peeling off her gloves. "He's alive, that's what matters." But even as she said it, a cold certainty settled in her gut. She'd crossed a line tonight, a big one, and lines like that came with consequences. She went to the locker room, changed out of her blood-soaked scrubs, and sat on the bench with her head in her hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the first tremors of doubt. What had she done? Saved a life? Yes. But also ignored protocol, exceeded her authority, performed procedures she wasn't licensed for. In the heat of the moment, it had seemed like the only choice. Now, in the fluorescent silence of the empty locker room, it felt reckless. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger brother, Marco. Proud of you, sis. Heard you pulled a miracle tonight. Call me tomorrow. Word traveled fast in a hospital. Maya managed a weak smile. At least someone thought she'd done the right thing. She clocked out at 2:17 a.m. and drove home to her small apartment in Seminole Heights, the streets empty and slick with rain. She showered, scrubbing dried blood from under her fingernails, and collapsed into bed. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by flashes of surgical lights and the phantom sensation of forceps in her hand. When she woke 6 hours later, she felt hollow. She made coffee, scrolled through her phone, tried to convince herself that everything would be fine. The operator was alive. Garrison would close the case. The hospital administration would see it as a necessary emergency intervention. She was still trying to believe that when her phone rang at 9 a.m. Maya Rodriguez, the voice was clipped, professional. Yes? This is Sharon Feldman from Human Resources at Clearwater Memorial. I need you to come in for a meeting this morning, 10 o'clock. Administration building, 3rd floor. Maya's stomach dropped. What's this about? We'll discuss it when you arrive. Please don't be late. The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, her coffee going cold in her hand. This wasn't a congratulations meeting. This wasn't a debrief. This was something else entirely. She arrived at the hospital at 9:45, wearing clean scrubs and the kind of dread that made her skin feel too tight. The administration building was separate from the main hospital, a gleaming glass structure that always felt more corporate than medical. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor and was directed to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Tampa skyline. Inside, 3 people waited. Sharon Feldman from HR, Dr. Victor Harmon, the chief of staff, and a man in a suit she didn't recognize. Sit down, Ms. Rodriguez, Dr. Harmon said, gesturing to a chair across from them. Maya sat. Her hands felt numb. Dr. Harmon folded his hands on the table, his expression grave. Last night, you performed an unauthorized surgical procedure on a patient, multiple procedures, in fact, 40 extractions without supervision, without clearance, and without the credentials to do so. He was dying, Maya said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. Dr. Garrison was stuck in traffic. If I'd waited, you should have waited, Dr. Harmon interrupted, or transferred the patient to another facility. What you did was not only against hospital policy, it opened us up to massive liability. I saved his life. That's not the point. The words hit Maya like a slap. She stared at Dr. Harmon, searching for some sign of understanding, some acknowledgement that she'd made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. There was nothing, just cold administrative calculation. The man in the suit leaned forward. I'm Robert Klein, the hospital's legal counsel. Ms. Rodriguez, do you understand that if that patient had died on your table, you could have faced criminal charges? Manslaughter, at minimum, and the hospital would have been named in the lawsuit. But he didn't die, Maya said, her voice rising. He's alive. I did what needed to be done. You did what you weren't authorized to do, Sharon Feldman said quietly. And that's the problem. Dr. Harmon slid a folder across the table. Inside, you'll find your termination notice, effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the building by security. Your final paycheck will be mailed within 2 weeks. Maya's vision blurred. You're firing me? We're protecting the hospital, Dr. Harmon said. I'm sorry, but this is the only option. The only option? Maya's voice cracked. I saved a Navy SEAL's life, and you're firing me? We're terminating your employment due to gross violations of protocol, Klein said. What happens next is up to you. You can sign the non-disclosure agreement in that folder, take your severance, and move on. Or you can make this difficult, and we'll make sure every hospital in Florida knows you performed unauthorized surgery. It was a threat. A clean corporate threat wrapped in legal language. Maya stood, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm not signing anything. Then you'll leave with nothing, Klein said. I'll leave with my integrity, Maya shot back, which is more than any of you have. She turned and walked out, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Security was waiting in the hallway, two guards who looked embarrassed to be there. They escorted her to her locker, watched while she emptied it into a cardboard box, and walked her through the main lobby. Other nurses stared. Some looked away. Angela caught her eye from across the hallway and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Maya kept her head up, refused to let the tears fall until she was in her car. Then she sat in the parking lot and cried until her throat ached. She drove home in a daze, the box of her belongings on the passenger seat like evidence of a crime she didn't commit. Her apartment felt smaller than it had that morning, the walls closing in. She set the box on the kitchen counter and stared at it. A stethoscope, a few personal photos, a coffee mug that said, "Nurses, saving your ass, not kissing it." The irony wasn't lost on her. For 3 days, Maya existed in a fog. She ignored calls from Marco, from friends, from Angela. She sat on her couch and replayed the trauma bay over and over, wondering if she'd made the wrong choice. But every time she reached that conclusion, she saw the operator's face, heard the flatline, felt the forceps pulling out bullet after bullet, and she knew, deep in her bones, that she'd do it again. On the 4th day, the sound started. At first, Maya thought it was thunder, a low, rumbling growl that shook the windows. But the sky was clear, the weather report calling for sun all week. She stepped onto her balcony, shielding her eyes against the afternoon glare. The sound grew louder. Not thunder. Rotors. 2 black helicopters descended from the sky, their downwash sending trash cans tumbling down the street, car alarms wailing in protest. They hovered directly above her apartment building, close enough that Maya could see the military insignia on their sides. Neighbors poured out of their units, phones raised, filming. Maya stood frozen, her hair whipping around her face, her heart in her throat. The helicopters landed in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. The rotors slowed but didn't stop. A door opened on the nearest aircraft and a man stepped out, tall, graying hair, wearing a dress uniform decorated with more ribbons than Maya could count. He walked directly toward her building. Directly toward her. Maya's hands gripped the balcony railing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of fever dream, a breakdown, anything but what it looked like. The officer stopped at the base of her building and looked up. His voice cut through the rotor noise like a blade. "Nurse Maya Rodriguez?" She nodded, unable to speak. He removed his cap, and the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Then he saluted her. Maya's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the railing harder, her knuckles white, as the officer held his salute with absolute precision. Around her, neighbors whispered, phones recording every second. Someone's kid started crying from the helicopter noise. A dog barked frantically from a ground-floor apartment. The officer lowered his hand and gestured toward her. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you. May I come up?" Maya found her voice, though it came out hoarse. "Yes, 3rd floor, Unit 3B. She stumbled back inside, her mind racing. What was happening? Had something gone wrong with the operator? Was she being arrested? The helicopters, the uniform, the salute, none of it made sense. She looked down at herself, still wearing the same yoga pants and oversized sweatshirt she'd put on that morning, her hair unwashed, her face bare. The knock came 30 seconds later, firm and official. Maya opened the door. The officer stood in her narrow hallway, his presence filling the small space. Up close, she could see the name tape on his uniform. Commander J. Sutton. Behind him stood 2 younger officers, both armed, both watching the stairwell like they expected a threat. "Nurse Rodriguez," Commander Sutton said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and something else. Respect. "May I come in?" "Of course." Maya stepped aside, suddenly aware of the dirty dishes in her sink, the laundry basket on the couch, the mess of her unraveling life. Sutton entered, removed his cap, and turned to face her. The other officers remained in the hallway, closing the door behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sutton reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope, official military insignia stamped across the front. "4 days ago," he began, "you saved the life of Lieutenant Ethan Cross, one of the most decorated operators in naval special warfare. He'd taken 40 rounds in an ambush during a classified operation. By every metric, he should have died in that SUV before we even reached the hospital." Maya's throat tightened. "Is he okay?" He's alive because of you. Sutton held out the envelope. The lieutenant woke up yesterday. The first thing he asked for was your name. The second thing he did was request that we find you and deliver this personally. Maya took the envelope with shaking hands. The paper was heavy, official. She broke the seal and unfolded a letter written in sharp, precise handwriting. Nurse Rodriguez, I don't remember your face. I don't remember the trauma bay or the surgery. But I remember your voice. You kept talking to me, telling me to hold on, that I wasn't done yet. In 12 years of service, I've never been that close to the edge. You pulled me back. They told me you lost your job because you saved my life. That's unacceptable. I'm working to fix it. You have my gratitude, you have my respect, and you have the full backing of everyone who serves. LTE. Cross Maya read it twice, tears blurring the words. He's really okay? More than okay, Sutton said. He's expected to make a full recovery. But that's not why I'm here. He gestured toward the couch. May I? They sat, Maya clutching the letter like a lifeline. Sutton leaned forward, his expression serious. What happened to you at Clearwater Memorial is a disgrace. You acted with extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances, and they punished you for it. That kind of institutional cowardice doesn't sit well with us. I violated protocol, Maya said quietly, though the words felt hollow. They had legal reasons. They had fear, Sutton interrupted. Fear of lawsuits, fear of liability, fear of standing behind their own people when it matters. But here's what they didn't count on. He pulled out a second envelope, this one thicker. The Department of Defense takes care of those who take care of ours. Inside this envelope is a formal commendation from the Secretary of the Navy, a Civilian Valor Award, and a check for $100,000. Maya's breath caught. What? There's also an invitation to a recognition ceremony in Washington next month, where you'll receive the Distinguished Civilian Service Medal. The media will be there. Your story will be told. And Clearwater Memorial's decision to fire you will be part of that story. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Maya looked at the envelope in her lap, then back at Sutton. You're going public with this. We're honoring you publicly, Sutton corrected. What happens to the hospital after that is their problem, not ours. Maya's hands trembled. For 4 days, she'd felt like a criminal, like she'd done something terrible that deserved punishment. Now a commander was sitting in her apartment, telling her she was a hero. The whiplash was almost too much to process. I need to ask you something, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Was it worth it? Saving him? Losing everything? Sutton's expression softened. Lieutenant Cross has a wife and a 6-year-old daughter. They get to have him because of what you did. Is that worth a hospital job? The question didn't need an answer. Sutton stood, replacing his cap. The ceremony is in 4 weeks. We'll send you the details. In the meantime, if you need anything, legal support, references, whatever, you call this number. He handed her a card with a direct military line. You're not alone in this, Nurse Rodriguez. Not anymore. He saluted her again, and this time Maya managed to stand and nod in return, too overwhelmed to speak. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving Maya standing in her apartment with 2 envelopes and a letter that felt like redemption. Outside, the helicopters roared back to life and lifted off, the sound fading into the Tampa sky. Maya sank onto the couch and opened the thicker envelope with shaking hands. Inside was the commendation, an ornate certificate with official seals and signatures. Beneath it was a check made out to her for $100,000. She stared at it, unable to process the number. 4 days ago, she'd been worried about rent. Now she was holding more money than she'd made in 2 years of nursing. Her phone buzzed, then again and again. The first text was from Angela. Maya, turn on the news right now. Maya scrambled for her laptop, pulling up a local news stream. The headline made her stomach drop. Fired nurse honored by Navy after saving SEAL's life. The video showed the helicopters landing outside her building, Commander Sutton walking toward her apartment. The footage was grainy, shot from someone's phone, but clear enough. The reporter's voice was breathless with excitement. An unprecedented show of support from the military. Sources confirmed that Nurse Maya Rodriguez was terminated from Clearwater Memorial Hospital after performing an emergency surgery on a classified Navy operator. Tonight, the Department of Defense responded by honoring her with one of the highest civilian awards. We've reached out to Clearwater Memorial for comment, but so far they've declined to respond. Maya's phone rang. Marco. "Are you seeing this?" her brother shouted, not waiting for her to say hello. "You're on every channel. They're calling you a hero." Marco, yeah. "No, seriously, Maya, every single news site. Twitter's going crazy. People are demanding the hospital rehire you. This is insane." Maya tried to speak, but her throat had closed up. She ended the call and kept scrolling. Marco was right. The story had exploded. Within hours, it had jumped from local news to national coverage. Social media was a firestorm. Hashtags were trending. Hashtag justice for Maya. Hashtag Clearwater must answer. Hashtag she did the right thing. People were furious. Not at her. At the hospital. The comments section on every article was brutal. She saved a hero's life and got fired? What kind of system is this? Clearwater Memorial should be ashamed. This nurse deserves better. They punished courage. They chose bureaucracy over a human life. Disgusting. Maya closed the laptop, her hands shaking. This was too much, too fast. Yesterday she'd been a pariah. Today she was trending. The shift was dizzying, terrifying, and strangely validating all at once. Her phone rang again. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Rodriguez? This is Vanessa Park from CNN. We'd love to have you on tonight to tell your story. Would you be available for an interview at 7? I don't know. We'll send a car. You don't have to prepare anything. Just tell people what happened. That's all." Maya hesitated, her mind spinning. Part of her wanted to hide, to let this blow over quietly. But another part, the part that had spent 4 days feeling like a criminal, wanted to speak. Wanted people to know that she'd made the right choice, even if it had cost her everything. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." The interview aired at 7 p.m. Maya sat across from Vanessa Park in a downtown studio, the lights hot and bright. A small microphone clipped to her collar. She'd changed into a simple blouse and jeans, brushed her hair, tried to look presentable, but inside she was still reeling. "Maya," Vanessa began, her tone gentle but direct, "walk us through that night. What went through your mind when you realized you were the only person who could save Lieutenant Cross?" Maya took a breath. "I wasn't thinking about protocol or consequences. I was thinking that a man was dying and I had the skills to stop it. That's what nurses do. We don't ask permission to save lives." "But you knew you could lose your job." "I knew I could lose my job, yes, but I also knew I couldn't live with myself if I let him die because I was too afraid to act." The interview went on for 20 minutes. Maya kept her answers honest, measured, refusing to trash the hospital, even as Vanessa probed for anger. She didn't need to attack them. The facts spoke for themselves. When it was over, Vanessa shook her hand. "You're incredibly brave. I hope you know that." Maya managed a small smile. "I'm just a nurse who did her job." But the world didn't see it that way. By the time Maya got home, the interview had been viewed over 2 million times. The backlash against Clearwater Memorial intensified. Protesters gathered outside the hospital the next morning, holding signs. "Rehire Maya Rodriguez. Courage over cowardice. We stand with Maya." Inside the hospital, the administration scrambled. Dr. Victor Harmon released a statement that night, his tone defensive and hollow. "Clearwater Memorial Hospital is committed to the highest standards of patient care and safety. While we commend Nurse Rodriguez for her intentions, we stand by our decision to enforce hospital protocols. These protocols exist to protect both patients and staff." The statement was eviscerated online within minutes. "Protecting patients? You fired the woman who saved one." Protocols don't save lives, people do. This statement is a slap in the face to every healthcare worker. The Florida Board of Nursing launched an investigation into the hospital's termination policies. The state medical board followed suit. News outlets dug into Clearwater Memorial's history, uncovering other cases of nurses and doctors punished for stepping outside rigid hierarchies. The hospital's reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, was unraveling in real time. Maya watched it all from her apartment, still processing. She didn't feel victorious. She felt exhausted, vindicated, and strangely sad. This wasn't what she'd wanted. She'd never set out to destroy the hospital. She'd just wanted to save a life. On day 6, she received a call from an unknown Washington number. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Senator Patricia Givens. I sit on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I've been following your story. I'd like to invite you to testify before Congress about the challenges healthcare workers face when institutional policies conflict with emergency care. Maya blinked. Testify? Before Congress? Your case has raised important questions about liability, protocol enforcement, and how we treat medical professionals who go above and beyond. Your voice matters. Maya agreed before she could talk herself out of it. The media coverage intensified. More interviews, more articles, more people dissecting every detail of that night in the trauma bay. Maya's face was everywhere, on news sites, social media, even a segment on 60 Minutes. She became a symbol, whether she wanted to be or not. And through it all, Clearwater Memorial stayed silent. Until day 8. Maya was drinking coffee on her balcony when her phone rang. Sharon Feldman from HR. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm calling on behalf of the hospital board. They'd like to offer you full reinstatement with back pay, a formal apology, and a promotion to senior trauma nurse. Maya set down her coffee, her hand steady. No. There was a pause. I'm sorry? I said no. Ms. Rodriguez, this is a generous offer. It's a PR move, Maya interrupted, her voice calm but firm. You didn't fire me because I violated protocol. You fired me because you were afraid of a lawsuit. Now you're offering me my job back because you're afraid of public backlash. That's not an apology. That's damage control. We're trying to make this right. You can't make it right by pretending it didn't happen. I'm not coming back to a hospital that punishes people for saving lives. Find someone else to rebuild your reputation. She hung up. The rejection went viral within hours. Someone had leaked it to the press. Maybe Sharon, maybe someone else on the call. Maya didn't care. The message was clear. She couldn't be bought. The next day, she received an offer from Summit Regional Medical Center in Colorado Springs, a state-of-the-art facility known for its progressive policies and military partnerships. They wanted to create a new position, Director of Emergency Ethics, responsible for developing protocols that empowered frontline staff to make critical decisions without fear of retribution. The salary was nearly double what she'd made at Clearwater. Maya accepted. 2 weeks later, she flew to Washington for the ceremony. The venue was a grand hall near the Pentagon, filled with military brass, politicians, and journalists. Maya wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her hands clasped to keep them from shaking. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. The Secretary of the Navy stood waiting, a medal in his hands, gold with a blue ribbon, the Distinguished Civilian Service Medal. The crowd rose to their feet, applause thundering through the hall. The secretary pinned the medal to her dress, then leaned in. You honored the uniform without wearing it. That's the highest form of service. Maya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Then they brought out Lieutenant Ethan Cross. He walked onto the stage slowly, still recovering but standing tall. He was younger than Maya had imagined, with sharp blue eyes and a scar along his jaw she recognized from the trauma bay. He saluted her, just like Commander Sutton had. Thank you, he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. My daughter gets to keep her dad because of you. The crowd erupted again. Cameras flashed. Maya shook his hand, and for a moment, all the pain and uncertainty of the past weeks evaporated. This was why she'd done it. This moment, this life, this man standing in front of her instead of buried beneath 40 bullets. After the ceremony, she was pulled into a press conference. Reporters fired questions at her from every direction. How does it feel to be recognized after being fired? What do you want to say to Clearwater Memorial? Do you think this will change hospital policies nationwide? Maya took the microphone, her voice steady. I'm not here to villainize anyone. I'm here because a system failed, and we need to fix it. Healthcare workers shouldn't have to choose between saving lives and keeping their jobs. Institutions need to support courage, not punish it. If my story helps change that, then everything I went through was worth it. The room fell silent. Then one reporter stood and started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. That night, Maya returned to her hotel, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from release. For 2 weeks, she'd carried the weight of judgment, condemnation, and doubt. Now, for the first time since that night in the trauma bay, she felt free. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Ethan Cross. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say thank you one more time. My wife and daughter want to meet you when you're ready. No pressure, just gratitude." Maya smiled and typed back, "I'd like that." She fell asleep that night with the medal on her nightstand, the ceremony still replaying in her mind. Tomorrow she'd fly to Colorado and start her new position. Tomorrow she'd begin rebuilding. But tonight she let herself rest in the knowledge that she'd done the right thing, even when the world had told her otherwise. Back in Tampa, Clearwater Memorial was in free fall. The board had called an emergency meeting, the legal team buried in damage control, the PR department drafting statements nobody believed. Dr. Victor Harmon sat in his office, staring at his computer screen, watching the ceremony footage for the third time. He'd fired a hero. The entire world now knew it. His phone rang. The hospital board chairman. "Victor, we need to talk about your future here." Harmon closed his eyes. He'd spent 30 years building his career, and it was crumbling in less than 3 weeks. Meanwhile, in a conference room across the city, the Florida Attorney General's office was reviewing documents, patient complaints, staff testimony, evidence of a pattern, nurses and doctors silenced, punished, forced out for making hard calls in impossible situations. An investigator looked up from her notes. "This isn't just about Maya Rodriguez. This is systemic." Her supervisor nodded. "Then we treat it that way. Full investigation, grand jury if necessary." The walls were closing in. And in Colorado Springs, Maya Rodriguez stood in her new office, looking out at the Rocky Mountains, ready to build something better. The mountains looked different in February. Snow capped the peaks in jagged white lines, and the air carried a crispness that made Maya's lungs ache in the best way. She'd been in Colorado Springs for exactly 3 days, and Summit Regional Medical Center already felt more like home than Clearwater ever had. Her office was small but functional, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the surgical wing, a desk stacked with policy manuals she was supposed to revise, and a plaque on the door that read Director of Emergency Ethics. The title still felt surreal. 3 weeks ago, she'd been unemployed and humiliated. Now she was writing protocols that could reshape how hospitals handled crisis decisions. Dr. Lillian Cortez, Summit's chief medical officer, knocked on the open door. She was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun and the kind of commanding presence that made residents stand straighter when she entered a room. "Settling in?" "Doctor," Cortez asked, stepping inside. "Getting there," Maya said, gesturing at the mountain of paperwork. "This is a lot of policy for one person to overhaul." "You're not one person. You're a symbol." Dr. Cortez sat across from her, folding her hands. "Every hospital in the country is watching what we do here. If we can build a framework that protects both patients and staff, it changes everything. That's why I created this position, and that's why you're the only person who could fill it." Maya felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. "No pressure, right?" Dr. Cortez smiled. "Pressure is what makes diamonds. You've already proven you can handle it." That afternoon, Maya attended her first staff meeting. The conference room was packed. Trauma nurses, ER physicians, surgical residents, all watching her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She recognized the look. She'd been the new hire before, the outsider trying to prove herself. "Doctor." Cortez introduced her with military efficiency. "This is Maya Rodriguez, our new Director of Emergency Ethics. Some of you may have seen her story in the news. She's here to help us build better systems so that no one has to choose between protocol and saving a life." A younger doctor raised his hand, his tone challenging. "With all due respect, what happened in Tampa was an extreme outlier. Most of us will never face a situation like that." Maya met his gaze. "You're right. Most of you won't pull 40 bullets out of a Navy SEAL, but you will face moments where the rulebook doesn't cover what's happening in front of you. You'll have seconds to decide, and those seconds will define whether someone lives or dies. My job is to make sure you're supported when you make that call, not punished for it." The room was silent. Then an older nurse in the back, gray hair, tired eyes, spoke up. I've been working ER for 23 years. I've seen good people get destroyed for doing the right thing. If you can actually change that, you'll have my support." Others nodded. The tension eased. Maya exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath. After the meeting, a younger nurse approached her in the hallway. Her name tag read Sarah Bennett, RN. "I just wanted to say thank you," Sarah said quietly. "I was almost fired last year for overriding an attending's order during a cardiac arrest. The patient lived, but I got written up. Your story gave me hope that things might actually change." Maya squeezed her shoulder. "They will. I promise." But even as she said it, her phone buzzed with a news alert that made her stomach drop. Clearwater Memorial under federal investigation for systemic retaliation against medical staff. She opened the article. The Florida Attorney General's office had launched a formal probe into the hospital's employment practices. Interviews with former staff revealed a pattern of intimidation, wrongful terminations, and suppressed incident reports. The investigation named Dr. Victor Harmon specifically, citing his role in creating a culture of fear. Maya sat down on a bench in the hallway, reading through the details. Other nurses had come forward, people who'd been fired for questioning unsafe staffing ratios, for reporting medication errors, for advocating too loudly for patients. The hospital's pristine reputation was built on silence and threats. Her phone rang. Angela. "Maya, it's chaos here," Angela said, her voice tight. "Federal agents are in the building. They're interviewing everyone. Harmon's locked himself in his office. The board is trying to distance themselves, but nobody's buying it." "Are you okay?" Maya asked. "I'm fine. Scared, but fine. They asked me about your case. I told them the truth, that you saved a life and got punished for it. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry." "You're speaking up now," Maya said. "That's what matters." The investigation dominated the news cycle for the next week. Every day brought new revelations. Internal emails showed Harmon had ordered staff to downplay complications to avoid liability. Patient safety reports had been altered. Whistleblowers had been systematically silenced. The public backlash was ferocious. Protesters returned to the hospital, this time with a different message. Shut it down. Lawmakers called for Harmon's medical license to be revoked. Insurance companies launched their own audits, and the Department of Justice joined the investigation, examining whether federal healthcare fraud had occurred. Maya watched from Colorado, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. She'd never wanted to destroy Clearwater. She just wanted them to admit they were wrong. But the institution had been rotting from the inside long before she'd ever set foot in that trauma bay. Her case had just been the spark that ignited the collapse. On day 10 in Colorado, Maya received an unexpected call from Lieutenant Ethan Cross. "I'm in town," he said. "Rehab facility near Peterson Air Force Base. I know you're probably busy, but I'd like to buy you coffee, if you have time." They met at a small cafe near the base, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. Ethan arrived in civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, moving a bit stiffly but looking healthier than he had at the ceremony. He ordered 2 coffees and sat across from her. "You're healing well," Maya observed. "Thanks to you." He stirred his coffee, his expression serious. "I wanted to tell you something in person, not through a letter or a phone call. When I was in that trauma bay, I was conscious for longer than anyone realized. I heard you talking to your team, heard the fear in their voices, but I also heard you. You kept saying, 'Stay with me, don't quit on me,' over and over, like you were pulling me back with just your voice." Maya's throat tightened. "I didn't know you could hear me. I shouldn't have been able to, but I did, and it mattered." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've lost teammates, good men who deserve to live. Some died because of mistakes. Some died because the right person wasn't there at the right time. You were the right person. And I need you to know that what happened after, the firing, the backlash, none of that changes what you did. You gave me my life back." Maya blinked back tears. "Your daughter. How is she?" Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her a photo, a little girl with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile sitting on his shoulders. "She doesn't understand what happened. Just knows Daddy was hurt and a nice nurse made him better. She drew you a picture." He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Maya opened it, Crayon stick figures, a man on a table, a woman in scrubs with a giant smile, hearts floating everywhere. At the top, in wobbly letters, "Thank you for saving my daddy." She pressed her hand to her mouth, unable to speak. "Keep it," Ethan said gently. "You earned it." They talked for another hour, about his recovery, her new position, the surreal aftermath of going viral. When they parted ways, Ethan hugged her carefully, still protecting his healing ribs. "You're changing the system," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you it's not worth the fight." Maya drove back to the hospital with the drawing on her passenger seat, the little girl's words echoing in her head. This was why she'd done it. Not for medals or recognition, but for moments like this. A child who still had her father. A family that hadn't been shattered. Back at Summit, the work intensified. Maya spent her days interviewing staff, reviewing incident reports, identifying gaps in the emergency protocol. She met with legal teams, ethics boards, and risk management specialists. The goal was to create a framework that gave medical professionals the authority to act in crisis situations without fear of immediate termination. It was exhausting, technical work, endless meetings, dense policy language, pushback from administrators worried about liability. But slowly, the structure took shape. The centerpiece was something Maya called the Critical Decision Protocol, a tiered system that allowed nurses and residents to escalate care in life-threatening emergencies without waiting for attending approval. It included mandatory debriefs after critical incidents, legal protection for good faith decisions, and a rapid response ethics team available 24/7. Dr. Cortez presented it to the board in early March. The vote was unanimous. "This goes live next Monday," Dr. Cortez told Maya afterward, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "You did it." But before the protocol could launch, everything changed. It was a Friday night, 11 p.m., and Maya was reviewing training materials in her office when the trauma alert sounded. She glanced at the monitor. Multiple GSWs, mass casualty incident, ETA 3 minutes. Her pulse kicked up out of instinct. She wasn't working the floor anymore, but the sound still triggered that old adrenaline rush. She walked to the observation window overlooking the trauma bay, watching the team prep. Residents checking equipment, nurses laying out surgical kits, everyone moving with practiced efficiency. The first ambulance screamed into the bay, then a second, then a third. Maya's stomach dropped. This wasn't a normal trauma. This was catastrophic. The first victim was a teenage girl, her chest soaked with blood. The second was a young man, unconscious, multiple wounds. The third was a middle-aged woman, already coding. Sarah Bennett, the young nurse who'd thanked Maya in the hallway, was lead on the first bay. Maya watched her work, fast, focused, no hesitation. But the girl's pressure was dropping, the bleeding too severe. The attending surgeon was in OR2, finishing another case. Sarah looked at the monitor, at the girl's pale face, at the blood pooling on the floor. Then she looked up at the observation window and locked eyes with Maya. The moment stretched. Maya saw the decision forming in Sarah's face, the same calculation Maya had made in Tampa. Wait for the surgeon and watch the girl die, or act now and risk everything. Sarah grabbed the scalpel. Maya's breath stopped. The procedure was textbook, fast, brutal, necessary. Sarah opened the chest cavity, clamped the bleeding vessel, bought precious time. The girl's pressure stabilized, but the room had gone silent, every eye on Sarah, everyone understanding what had just happened. The attending surgeon burst through the doors 2 minutes later, scrubbed and furious. "Who authorized a thoracotomy?" Dr. Raymond Kells demanded, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Sarah stood her ground, blood on her gloves. "She was dying. I didn't have time to wait." "You're a nurse, not a surgeon." "I'm a nurse who saved her life." The words hung in the air, an exact echo of what Maya had said in Tampa. Dr. Kells' face turned red. He looked ready to explode. Then he glanced at the girl, still alive, pressure holding, color returning to her face. His jaw tightened. "We'll discuss this later. Everyone else, back to work." Maya left the observation window and headed down to the trauma bay. By the time she arrived, the chaos had settled. The girl was being prepped for transfer to ICU. Sarah was stripping off her gloves, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Sarah," Maya said quietly, The younger nurse looked up, fear and defiance warring in her expression. I know, I'm probably fired, but she was 16 years old and dying in front of me. I couldn't. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, Maya interrupted. The critical decision protocol goes live Monday, but the principles are already in effect. You made a judgment call in a life-threatening emergency. That's protected. Dr. Kells appeared behind them, his expression still thunderous. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to speak with you, privately. They stepped into a consultation room. Dr. Kells closed the door, his posture rigid. That nurse just performed a surgical procedure without authorization, he said, his voice tight. If that girl had died, but she didn't, Maya said calmly. She's alive because Sarah Bennett had the courage to act. Isn't that what we're here for? We're here to follow protocol. Your protocol would have killed her. The words hit like a physical blow. Doctor. Kells stared at her, his face flushing darker. You're advocating for chaos, for nurses to play doctor whenever they feel like it. I'm advocating for empowering trained professionals to make critical decisions when every second counts. That's not chaos. That's common sense. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Then we defend it, Maya said, her voice hardening. Because defending a life saved is a lot easier than explaining why we let someone die. Dr. Kells opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. Dr. Cortez is going to hear about this. I'm counting on it, Maya replied. He stormed out. Maya stayed in the consultation room, her heart pounding. This was it, the first real test of everything she'd been trying to build. If the hospital backed Sarah, the protocol would prove its worth. If they punished her, Maya's entire mission would collapse before it even started. Dr. Cortez called an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. Maya arrived to find Sarah already there, looking exhausted and terrified. Dr. Kells sat across the table, arms folded. The hospital's legal counsel was present, along with 2 board members. Dr. Cortez wasted no time. Let's establish the facts. Sarah, walk us through your decision-making process. Sarah's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. The patient was a 16-year-old female with multiple GSWs to the chest. Blood pressure was 60/30 and dropping. Heart rate was 140. She was in hypovolemic shock and decompensating rapidly. Dr. Kells was in surgery. The next available surgeon was 20 minutes out. I assessed that she would not survive the wait, so I performed an emergency thoracotomy to control the bleeding. Without authorization, Dr. Kells added sharply. Without time to ask for it, Sarah countered. Dr. Cortez turned to Maya. Your assessment? Maya kept her voice professional. Sarah followed the exact principles we've been developing for the critical decision protocol. She identified an immediate threat to life, exhausted all available options, and used her training to intervene. The patient survived because of her actions. This is precisely the kind of scenario the protocol is designed to support. The legal counsel spoke up, his tone cautious. With respect, the protocol isn't officially active yet. Technically, Nurse Bennett acted outside her scope of practice. Then we're not protecting courage, Maya said, her voice sharp. We're punishing it. Again. The room fell silent. Dr. Cortez studied Sarah for a long moment, then turned to the board members. Gentlemen, we have a choice. We can punish a nurse who saved a teenage girl's life, or we can stand behind the values we claim to represent. What's it going to be? One board member shifted uncomfortably. If we don't enforce consequences, we're opening ourselves to what? Doctor Cortez interrupted. To having a reputation for supporting life-saving decisions? I'll take that risk. The second board member nodded slowly. I agree. The optics of punishing her would be catastrophic, especially after the Rodriguez case. Dr. Kells looked like he'd swallowed glass. So we're just ignoring chain of command? We're acknowledging that chain of command doesn't always align with emergency medicine, Dr. Cortez said firmly. She turned to Sarah. You're not fired, you're not even written up, but you will participate in a formal debrief and you'll help us refine the critical decision protocol based on what you experienced. Clear? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. As the meeting dispersed, Dr. Kells caught Maya in the hallway. You're setting a dangerous precedent, he said, his voice low and angry. Sooner or later, someone's going to make the wrong call and a patient will die. When that happens, it'll be on you. Maya met his gaze without flinching. And when someone makes the right call and saves a life, that'll be on me too. I'll take those odds. He walked away and Maya leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. She'd won this round, but Kells was right about one thing. The stakes were only going to get higher. That afternoon, the story broke. Someone had leaked the incident to the press, and within hours, it was everywhere. Tampa nurse's protege saves teen using controversial protocol. The coverage was split. Some outlets praised Sarah and Summit Regional for backing her. Others questioned whether hospitals were losing control, whether untrained staff were being empowered to make decisions beyond their qualifications. The debate raged for days. Medical ethicists weighed in. Former surgeons wrote op-eds. Nursing organizations issued statements of support. And through it all, Maya's phone never stopped ringing. Interview requests, speaking invitations, threats from people who thought she was destroying medicine. Then, on day 14, the teenage girl woke up. Her name was Jessica Ramirez. She was a sophomore in high school, shot during a convenience store robbery. When the doctors told her what had happened, that a nurse had opened her chest to save her life, Jessica asked to meet Sarah. The hospital arranged it carefully, with cameras and Jessica's parents present. Maya watched from the doorway as Sarah sat beside the girl's bed, both of them crying, Jessica's mother holding Sarah's hand and saying thank you over and over. The video went viral within an hour. And this time, the narrative shifted. It wasn't about protocol or liability or institutional politics. It was about a 16-year-old girl who got to live because someone refused to let her die. The backlash against the backlash was swift. Public opinion swung hard in favor of the protocol. Other hospitals called Summit, asking for details, wanting to implement similar systems. Maya's inbox flooded with requests from medical centers across the country. But in Tampa, the storm was reaching its breaking point. The federal investigation concluded on March 18th. The findings were devastating. Systemic retaliation, falsified records, obstruction of patient safety reporting, and evidence that Dr. Victor Harmon had personally authorized the termination of 17 staff members who'd challenged unsafe practices. The Florida Board of Medicine revoked Harmon's license. The hospital board forced him to resign. Criminal charges were filed: fraud, obstruction, reckless endangerment. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, the federal government seized control of Clearwater Memorial under emergency provisions, citing imminent risk to patient safety. Maya was in her office when the news broke. She watched the live footage: federal marshals escorting administrators out of the building, patients being transferred to other facilities, the hospital's doors closing for the first time in 40 years. Her phone rang. It was a reporter from the New York Times. "Ms. Rodriguez, do you have any comment on Clearwater Memorial being shut down?" Maya thought about the nurses who'd lost their jobs, the patients who'd been failed, the system that had protected reputation over lives. She thought about the 40 bullets in that steel tray, the teenager who'd survived because Sarah Bennett had refused to wait, the little girl's crayon drawing still pinned to her office wall. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "institutions collapse under the weight of their own failures. What matters now is that we build something better in their place." The interview ended. Maya set down her phone and looked out at the mountains, feeling the full weight of what had just happened. Clearwater Memorial was gone. Dr. Harmon's career was over. And she, a 23-year-old nurse who'd been fired less than 2 months ago, had somehow become the face of a movement that was reshaping American healthcare. Her computer chimed. An email from Dr. Cortez. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow. They want you there." Maya opened the message. The subject line made her breath catch. National Implementation Discussion. She read through the details. The American Hospital Association wanted to discuss adopting the critical decision protocol nationwide. They wanted Maya to present to their executive board in Washington in 3 days. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined, bigger than Tampa, bigger than Summit, bigger than any single hospital or policy. This was a chance to change everything, but first she had to survive the presentation. And as she sat alone in her office, watching the sun set over the Rockies, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was only just beginning. The American Hospital Association headquarters in Washington occupied an entire block near DuPont Circle, glass and steel rising 12 stories, the kind of building designed to intimidate. Maya stood on the sidewalk outside, her presentation materials clutched in a leather portfolio, and tried to remember how to breathe. Dr. Cortez had flown in with her, along with Sarah Bennett. The hospital board had insisted that Sarah be part of the presentation, living proof that the protocol worked. But as they walked through the marble lobby toward the executive boardroom, Maya could see the terror in Sarah's eyes. "You're going to be fine," Maya whispered as they waited for the elevator. "I'm a floor nurse from Colorado Springs about to talk to people who run the entire healthcare system," Sarah replied, her voice tight. "I'm not fine. Neither was I when I pulled those bullets. You do it anyway." The elevator doors opened. Dr. Cortez stepped in first, her posture military straight. Maya and Sarah followed. The boardroom was enormous, an oval table that could seat 40, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and 23 hospital administrators already seated and waiting. Maya recognized some faces from news coverage. Others were strangers with expensive suits and expressions that gave nothing away. At the head of the table sat Dr. Gregory Mansfield, president of the AHA. He was in his 60s, silver hair immaculately styled, with the kind of presence that made people sit straighter when he spoke. "Ms. Rodriguez, Dr. Cortez, Nurse Bennett," he said, gesturing to 3 empty chairs. "Thank you for coming. We've been following your work with great interest." Interest. The word hung in the air like a trap. Maya sat down, opened her portfolio, and forced her hands to stop shaking. "Before we begin," Dr. Mansfield continued, "I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room. What happened at Clearwater Memorial was a catastrophe. A hospital shutdown, criminal charges, a complete institutional collapse. Some people in this room believe your actions contributed to that outcome." Maya met his gaze. "My actions saved a man's life. What happened to Clearwater was the result of decades of institutional rot that had nothing to do with me." "Fair enough." Dr. Mansfield leaned back. "But the question we're here to answer is this. Can your critical decision protocol be safely implemented nationwide, or is it a liability nightmare waiting to destroy more hospitals?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Maya. She stood, walked to the presentation screen, and pulled up the first slide. A photo of Lieutenant Ethan Cross in his dress uniform, healthy and smiling. "This man was dying," Maya said. 40 bullet wounds, no surgeon available. Every protocol said to wait. I didn't. He lived. That decision cost me my job, but it gave his daughter her father back. The question isn't whether the protocol is safe. The question is whether we're willing to keep punishing people for saving lives. She clicked to the next slide. Jessica Ramirez, the 16-year-old who'd survived Sarah's emergency thoracotomy, now sitting up in her hospital bed, smiling. This girl was bleeding out. Every protocol said Nurse Bennett should wait for a surgeon. She didn't. The girl lived. If we'd followed standard procedure, we'd be discussing 2 funerals instead of 2 success stories. Maya clicked through more slides, statistics on delayed intervention mortality, case studies from combat medicine, data from trauma centers that had implemented similar emergency override systems. The numbers were undeniable. When trained professionals were empowered to act in critical moments, survival rates improved. The protocol isn't about abandoning hierarchy, Maya continued. It's about recognizing that hierarchy can't always keep pace with crisis. It creates a framework, clear criteria for escalation, mandatory oversight, legal protection for good faith decisions, and accountability when things go wrong. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we have now. She finished and sat down. The room stayed quiet. Then a woman at the far end of the table spoke up. Dr. Patricia Nguyen, Chief Legal Counsel for a major hospital network. Ms. Rodriguez, your protocol sounds excellent in theory, but the liability exposure is massive. What happens when a nurse makes the wrong call and a patient dies? Who's responsible? The institution, Maya said without hesitation. That's the point. We support the decision, we accept the outcome. If someone acts in good faith and follows the protocol, they're protected. If they act recklessly, they're held accountable. But we don't punish people for trying to save lives. That's a very expensive philosophy, Dr. Nguyen countered. Cheaper than the alternative, Dr. Cortez interjected. Summit Regional has had 0 malpractice claims since implementing the protocol. Our staff retention is up 30%, and our patient outcomes have improved across every metric. The numbers work. Another administrator spoke, an older man with thick glasses and a skeptical expression. What about Clearwater? Their collapse sends a message that challenging institutional authority leads to destruction. Maya's jaw tightened. Clearwater collapsed because they prioritized reputation over patient safety. They falsified records, silenced whistleblowers, and created a culture of fear. My case exposed it, but the rot was there long before I ever walked into that trauma bay. And frankly, if a hospital can't survive transparency, it doesn't deserve to exist. The room erupted. Some administrators nodded, others looked furious. Dr. Mansfield raised his hand and the noise died down. Let's take a 15-minute recess, he said. Ms. Rodriguez, Nurse Bennett, excellent presentation. We'll reconvene shortly. Maya, Sarah, and Dr. Cortez filed out into the hallway. The moment the door closed, Sarah slumped against the wall. Did I just torpedo our chances? Maya asked. No, Dr. Cortez said, a slight smile on her face. You told them the truth. That's what they needed to hear. When they returned, the atmosphere had shifted. Dr. Mansfield's expression was softer, less guarded. We've discussed your proposal, he said. The board has concerns about implementation logistics, legal frameworks, and cost. But we also recognize that the current system is broken. So here's what we're prepared to offer. A pilot program. 20 hospitals nationwide will implement the critical decision protocol over the next 6 months. We'll track outcomes, gather data, and reassess. If it works, we expand. If it doesn't, we end it. Ms. Rodriguez, we'd like you to oversee the program. Maya's breath caught. Oversee 20 hospitals? With appropriate support staff, funding, and authority. You'd report directly to this board. Consider it a chance to prove your philosophy on a national scale. She looked at Dr. Cortez, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then at Sarah, whose eyes were wide with disbelief. I accept, Maya said. Dr. Mansfield extended his hand. Then let's change healthcare. The announcement went public 2 days later. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Nursing organizations celebrated. Medical associations issued cautious support. Conservative commentators called it dangerous overreach. Progressive outlets hailed it as a revolution. Maya's phone became unusable within hours. Interview requests, speaking invitations, hate mail, and messages of support flooding in simultaneously. She hired an assistant, then a small team, then rented office space in a building near Summit Regional to coordinate the pilot program. The 20 hospitals were chosen carefully: urban trauma centers, rural facilities, teaching hospitals, and community clinics. Each one represented a different challenge, a different demographic, a different set of institutional obstacles. Maya's job was to train their staff, implement the protocol, and ensure they had the support to make it work. She traveled constantly: Seattle, Miami, Chicago, Atlanta, Phoenix. Every hospital was the same speech, the same training modules, the same skeptical faces in the audience. But slowly, the resistance began to crack. Nurses who'd been afraid to speak up started asking questions. Residents who'd been taught to defer to hierarchy started challenging unsafe orders. The culture was shifting. Meanwhile, in Tampa, the aftermath of Clearwater's collapse continued to unfold. Dr. Victor Harmon's trial began in late March, and the courtroom was packed with journalists, former staff, and patients who'd been harmed by the hospital's negligence. The prosecution's case was devastating. They presented emails showing Harmon had knowingly suppressed infection rate data to avoid bad publicity. Text messages where he'd ordered subordinates to falsify incident reports. Testimony from nurses who'd been threatened into silence after reporting unsafe staffing. And then they called Maya to the stand. She flew to Tampa on a Tuesday morning, wearing a Navy suit and carrying the weight of everyone who'd ever been silenced by the system. The courthouse was surrounded by cameras. Protesters held signs: "Justice for Maya, Harmon must pay, healthcare workers matter." Inside, the courtroom was cold and formal. Harmon sat at the defense table, his face expressionless, his once pristine reputation in ruins. His legal team watched Maya with predatory focus as she was sworn in. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Elena Vasquez, who wasted no time. Ms. Rodriguez, can you describe what happened the night you were terminated from Clearwater Memorial? Maya kept her voice steady. I performed an emergency extraction of 40 bullets from a critically injured patient. The attending surgeon was unavailable. The patient was dying. I made the decision to act. And what was the hospital's response? I was fired the next morning for violating protocol. Did Dr. Harmon give you an opportunity to explain your actions? No, he told me the hospital was protecting itself from liability. My badge was confiscated and I was escorted out by security. Vasquez turned to the jury. In your professional opinion, if you had waited for the surgeon, would the patient have survived? No, he would have died. So you saved a life, and Dr. Harmon fired you for it. Objection, Harmon's attorney stood, leading the witness. Sustained, the judge said. Vasquez shifted tactics. Miss Rodriguez, are you aware of other staff members who were terminated under similar circumstances? Yes, 17 that I know of. The federal investigation documented all of them. And in your view, what was Dr. Harmon's motivation for these terminations? Maya looked directly at Harmon. Fear. Fear of lawsuits, fear of bad publicity, fear of anything that might threaten the hospital's reputation. He valued the institution's image more than patient lives. The defense attorney jumped up for cross-examination, his tone aggressive. Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you performed surgical procedures you were not licensed to perform? I performed emergency interventions using skills I was trained for. But you're not a surgeon. Neither are combat medics, and they save lives every day. This wasn't a battlefield. Yes, it was, just a different kind. The attorney's face reddened. You admit you violated hospital protocol? I admit I chose a life over a rule book, and I'd do it again. The courtroom murmured. The judge gavelled for silence. The attorney tried to regain control, but Maya had already made her point. The jury's expression said everything. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness described Harmon's pattern of retaliation and intimidation. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Harmon showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but his hands gripped the table hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Sentencing was set for May. He faced up to 15 years in federal prison. Maya watched from the gallery, feeling no triumph, only exhaustion. This wasn't a victory. This was just the end of one man's ability to hurt people. The system that had enabled him was still out there, still punishing courage, still choosing liability over lives. But she was working to change that. The pilot program's first 3 months produced results that surprised even Maya's most optimistic projections. Out of 20 hospitals, 18 reported improved patient outcomes in emergency situations. Staff satisfaction increased across the board. Malpractice claims didn't rise. In fact, they decreased slightly because transparency and support made staff more confident, not more reckless. Only 2 hospitals struggled with implementation. One was a small rural facility that lacked the resources to train staff properly. The other was a teaching hospital in Boston, where the surgical department resisted ceding any authority to nurses. Maya flew to Boston to address the problem personally. The chief of surgery, Dr. Raymond Mercer, was everything she'd expected, arrogant, dismissive, and visibly annoyed that a 23-year-old nurse was telling him how to run his department. Your protocol undermines surgical authority, he said flatly, arms crossed. I won't allow my residents to defer to nurses. I'm not asking them to defer, Maya replied, keeping her tone professional. I'm asking them to collaborate, to recognize that in a crisis, rank matters less than competence. Nurses are not competent to make surgical decisions. Then explain Jessica Ramirez, explain Lieutenant Ethan Cross, explain the 18 other hospitals where this is working. Outliers, Mercer snapped. You got lucky, twice. That doesn't make you qualified to rewrite 100 years of medical hierarchy. Maya leaned forward. Dr. Mercer, I'm not interested in dismantling hierarchy. I'm interested in saving lives. If your ego is more important than that, then you're in the wrong profession. His face went purple. How dare... I dare because I've stood where your residents stand. I've made impossible choices with no backup and no support, and I've watched people die because someone with authority refused to act. You can keep clinging to outdated power structures, or you can help us build something better. Your choice. The room fell silent. Mercer stared at her, jaw working, clearly torn between throwing her out and acknowledging she had a point. Finally, he spoke. 1 month. I'll give your protocol 1 month. If it fails, we're done. Deal. It took 3 weeks, not 4. A resident named Dr. Amanda Park used the protocol to authorize an emergency pericardiocentesis when the attending was unreachable. The patient, a 42-year-old man with cardiac tamponade, survived. Dr. Park received a commendation, not a reprimand. Dr. Mercer called Maya personally. You were right. I was wrong. The protocol stays. It was the first time Maya had heard a surgeon admit a mistake without qualification. She marked it as progress. By June, the pilot program's success was undeniable. The AHA board voted unanimously to expand implementation to 100 hospitals. Maya's team grew from 5 people to 25. Her office became a command center, coordinating training, troubleshooting problems, and fielding requests from facilities desperate to join the program. And then, on June 14th, everything almost fell apart. A hospital in Detroit implemented the protocol badly. A nurse misinterpreted the escalation criteria and performed an unauthorized procedure on a stable patient, causing complications. The patient survived but required additional surgery. The family sued. The media pounced. Maya Rodriguez's protocol claims first victim, the headline screamed. Maya's inbox filled with angry messages. Critics who'd been waiting for the protocol to fail came out in force. Hospital administrators started questioning whether they wanted to continue. The program she'd spent months building was suddenly on the brink of collapse. Dr. Cortez called an emergency meeting with the AHA board. This is exactly what we expected, Dr. Cortez said firmly. Not every implementation will be perfect. Not every decision will be right. But one mistake doesn't invalidate the entire program. Dr. Mansfield looked grim. The optics are terrible. We're getting pressure to suspend the program until we can review. No, Maya interrupted. Everyone turned to look at her. We don't suspend. We investigate. We learn. We improve. But if we pull back now, we're sending the message that one mistake erases 18 successes. That's the same institutional cowardice that destroyed Clearwater. This is different, Dr. Nguyen argued. Clearwater was criminal negligence. Detroit was a protocol failure. Detroit was a training failure, Maya corrected. The nurse didn't understand the criteria. That's on us, not the protocol. We fix the training, add clear guidelines, and move forward. Shutting down now would be a betrayal of every nurse who's finally starting to believe the system might actually support them. The board argued for 2 hours. Finally, Dr. Mansfield called for a vote. The protocol stayed, but Maya had to implement mandatory certification for all staff before they could use the escalation procedures. It meant more work, tighter oversight, and higher standards, but it also meant the program would be stronger, more defensible, and less vulnerable to mistakes. The Detroit case settled out of court. The nurse received additional training but kept her job. The media moved on to the next scandal, and the protocol survived. By August, 112 hospitals had fully implemented the critical decision protocol. Patient outcomes continued to improve. Staff retention rates climbed, and Maya Rodriguez became a fixture on the lecture circuit, speaking at medical schools, nursing conferences, policy summits. She was exhausted, stretched thin, and running on 4 hours of sleep a night. But she was winning. Then, on August 22nd, she received a call that changed everything. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Special Agent Monica Reeves with the FBI. I'm calling about the Clearwater Memorial investigation. We've uncovered something that requires your immediate attention. Maya's stomach dropped. What kind of something? Not over the phone. Can you be in Tampa tomorrow? She flew out that night. The FBI field office was a concrete fortress in downtown Tampa, all reinforced glass and security checkpoints. Agent Reeves met her in a windowless conference room, flanked by 2 other agents and a stack of folders that looked ominous. Ms. Rodriguez, during our investigation into Dr. Harmon, we discovered a secondary pattern of behavior that goes beyond Clearwater Memorial, Reeves began. He was part of a network, hospital administrators, legal consultants, and medical board members who systematically suppress patient safety reporting across multiple facilities. They called it risk management. We call it conspiracy to commit fraud. Maya's hands went cold. How many hospitals? 17, across 6 states, all using the same playbook: falsified records, intimidated staff, buried incident reports. Clearwater was just the most visible collapse. Reeves slid a folder across the table. Inside were emails, financial records, and a list of names. Maya recognized some from the AHA board. Others were strangers, but the scope was staggering. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya asked. "Because you're the only person in healthcare right now with enough credibility to testify without being discredited. We're building a federal case, but we need someone on the inside who can explain how the system enables this behavior. Someone the jury will believe." Maya looked at the folder, then back at Reeves. "You're asking me to take down 17 hospitals. We're asking you to help us hold people accountable for putting profits over lives. That's what you've been doing all along, isn't it?" The choice settled over Maya like a weight. Testifying meant more media attention, more scrutiny, more enemies. It meant becoming the face of a fight that was bigger and uglier than anything she'd faced so far. But it also meant that the nurses who'd been silenced, the patients who'd been failed, the families who'd lost loved ones, they'd finally have justice. "When do you need my answer?" Maya asked. "We're filing charges in 2 weeks. Grand jury convenes in October." Maya closed the folder. "I'll do it." Agent Reeves smiled. "I thought you might." The indictments were unsealed on September 5th. 43 individuals, hospital executives, board members, consultants, charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. The media called it the largest healthcare corruption case in U.S. history. And Maya Rodriguez was scheduled to testify before Congress in exactly 2 weeks. The Capitol building looked different in September. Sharp morning light cutting across the white marble, tourists crowding the steps, the weight of history pressing down on everything. Maya stood at the entrance to the Senate hearing room, her testimony notes gripped in one hand, and tried to steady her breathing. Marco had flown in from Tampa to be there. He stood beside her now, wearing a suit he'd clearly borrowed, his presence the only thing keeping her grounded. "You've faced worse than this," he said quietly. Maya managed a weak smile. "Have I?" "You pulled 40 bullets out of a man who should have been dead. You survived getting fired. You testified against Harmon. This is just talking." "This is talking to the entire country while healthcare executives try to destroy my credibility." Marco squeezed her shoulder. "Then let them try. You've been destroyed before. You rebuilt. That's what you do." The doors opened. A congressional aide gestured for her to enter. The hearing room was massive, curved rows of seats rising toward the back, cameras positioned at every angle, senators arranged in a semicircle at the front. Maya recognized some faces from news coverage. Senator Patricia Givens, who'd first invited her to testify, along with 6 others from the Armed Services and Health Committees. At a separate table sat the defense attorneys for the indicted executives. They watched her with cold calculation, legal pads ready, prepared to dismantle everything she said. Maya took her seat at the witness table. A microphone was adjusted in front of her. The gallery behind her was packed. Journalists, healthcare workers, families of patients who'd been failed by the system. She caught sight of Angela from Clearwater sitting in the 3rd row, eyes red but determined. Senator Givens called the hearing to order. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for being here. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge your extraordinary courage, not just in the trauma bay that night, but in everything that followed. You've become a voice for healthcare workers who've been silenced for too long." "Thank you, Senator." Givens leaned forward. "Walk us through what you witnessed at Clearwater Memorial, not just your termination, but the culture that enabled it." Maya took a breath and began. She described the fear that permeated the hospital, how nurses whispered about unsafe staffing but never filed formal complaints, how residents were taught that questioning an attending's decision was career suicide, how incident reports vanished into administrative black holes, never to be investigated. "It wasn't just negligence," Maya said, her voice steady. "It was systematic. Dr. Harmon created an environment where protecting the hospital's reputation mattered more than protecting patients. And when anyone challenged that, they were eliminated." A senator from the opposing party interrupted. Senator William Kraft, known for defending corporate health care. "Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you violated multiple hospital protocols the night you were terminated?" I did. And those protocols exist for patient safety, correct? They exist to limit liability. There's a difference. Kraft's expression hardened. So you believe you're above the rules? I believe the rules failed that night. A man was dying. The protocol said to wait. Waiting would have killed him. I made a choice. A choice that cost you your job and triggered the collapse of an entire hospital. Maya's jaw tightened. That hospital collapsed because it was built on lies. My case exposed them. If transparency destroys an institution, the institution deserved to fall. The gallery erupted in applause. Givens gavelled for order, but her expression was approving. The questioning continued for 2 hours. Maya walked them through the federal investigation's findings, the falsified infection rates, the suppressed safety reports, the coordinated effort across 17 hospitals to hide systemic failures. She presented emails showing executives discussing how to manage whistleblowers, financial records proving hospitals had paid settlements to silence injured patients, text messages where administrators joked about gaming regulatory audits. The evidence was damning. Even Kraft stopped challenging her halfway through. When the hearing finally broke for recess, Maya felt hollowed out. She'd laid bare the ugliest parts of a system she'd once believed in, exposed the people who'd weaponized medicine against the vulnerable. But she'd also told the truth. And the truth was now on the congressional record. Agent Reeves found her in the hallway. You did well. The grand jury testimony next week will be easier. Just repeat what you said today. That's all? Maya's voice came out hoarse. That's all. The evidence speaks for itself. Your job is just to connect it to real consequences. Reeves paused. For what it's worth, you're changing things. Every nurse watching this knows they're not alone anymore. The grand jury proceedings were closed to the public, but the indictments that followed were not. On October 3rd, federal prosecutors announced charges against 43 individuals. The allegations ranged from conspiracy to commit fraud to negligent homicide in cases where suppressed safety reports had led directly to patient deaths. The trials would take years, but the message was immediate. The era of institutional impunity was over. Maya returned to Colorado Springs and threw herself back into the protocol expansion. By November, 200 hospitals had implemented the critical decision protocol. The data was overwhelming. Mortality rates in emergency situations had dropped by an average of 18% at participating facilities. Staff burnout decreased. Patient satisfaction improved. The model worked, but success brought its own pressures. Maya's days became an endless blur of conference calls, training sessions, media interviews, and policy meetings. She was 23 years old and running a program that affected millions of patients. The weight of it was crushing. On a cold Wednesday in late November, she was reviewing certification applications when her assistant knocked on the door. Maya, there's someone here to see you. Says it's personal. Lieutenant Ethan Cross stood in her waiting room, out of uniform, looking healthier than she'd ever seen him. Beside him was a woman with warm brown eyes and a little girl clinging to her hand. The daughter from the photos. Maya's throat tightened. Ethan. Sorry to drop in unannounced, he said. We were passing through Colorado Springs, and Emma here insisted on meeting the nurse who saved Daddy's life. The little girl stepped forward, clutching a new crayon drawing, another stick figure scene, this time showing Maya with a cape and a giant smile. Thank you for making Daddy better, Emma said, her voice small but earnest. Maya knelt down to her level. You're welcome, sweetheart. Your daddy's very brave. Mommy says you're braver. Maya's eyes stung. She looked up at Ethan's wife, who was crying quietly. I'm Laura, the woman said, extending her hand. I never got to thank you properly. You gave me my husband back. You gave Emma her father. I don't know how to repay that. You already have, Maya said, standing. Seeing him healthy, seeing your family whole, that's all the payment I need. They stayed for an hour, drinking coffee while Emma colored at Maya's desk. Ethan told her about his recovery, the physical therapy, the nightmares that were finally fading, his decision to transition into training roles instead of field operations. I'm done getting shot at, he said with a dry smile. Figured once was enough. When they left, Emma hugged Maya's leg fiercely, and Laura whispered, You changed our lives. Don't ever forget that. Maya watched them walk to their car through the office window, the drawing still in her hands, and felt something shift inside her. This was why she'd endured everything: the humiliation, the backlash, the endless scrutiny. For moments like this, for families that got to stay whole, December brought the culmination of everything Maya had been building toward. The AHA announced that the Critical Decision Protocol would become the national standard by March of the following year. Every accredited hospital in the United States would be required to implement it. The vote had been unanimous. The announcement made headlines. Medical journals published analysis pieces. Nursing schools added the protocol to their curricula. Maya's face appeared on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, "The Nurse Who Changed Healthcare." But the achievement that mattered most came from an unexpected source. Dr. Raymond Mercer, the Boston surgeon who'd fought the protocol, published an op-ed in the New England Journal of Medicine. The title was simple: "I Was Wrong." In it, he wrote, "I spent 30 years believing that surgical authority was absolute, that hierarchy existed for patient safety, that nurses who challenged physician decisions were dangerous. Maya Rodriguez proved me wrong, not with arguments, but with results." The Critical Decision Protocol doesn't undermine surgical expertise. It enhances it by recognizing that in a crisis, competence matters more than credentials. I was wrong to resist it. I was wrong to dismiss her, and I'm grateful she had the courage to prove me wrong. The piece went viral. Other physicians began publishing similar acknowledgments. The culture was shifting, slowly, grudgingly, but unmistakably. On December 15th, Maya was invited back to Washington for a ceremony she hadn't expected. The Secretary of Health and Human Services presented her with the Presidential Citizens Medal in a White House event attended by the President himself. "Maya Rodriguez exemplifies the best of American healthcare," the President said, pinning the medal to her jacket. "She saw a broken system and had the courage to fix it. Because of her, thousands of lives will be saved. Because of her, healthcare workers across this country know that doing the right thing won't cost them their careers. That's the kind of courage we need more of." The applause was deafening. Maya stood on the stage, the medal heavy on her chest, and thought about the 23-year-old nurse who'd been escorted out of Clearwater Memorial by security 6 months ago. That version of herself felt like a different person entirely. After the ceremony, she was pulled aside by a woman in an elegant suit, Dr. Helen Strauss, recently appointed Surgeon General. "Ms. Rodriguez, I have a proposition for you," Dr. Strauss said. "My office is creating a new division, Emergency Response and Medical Ethics. We need someone to lead it, someone who understands both the practical realities of frontline medicine and the policy frameworks needed to support it. The salary is government scale, the hours are brutal, and you'll be fighting bureaucracy every single day. Interested?" Maya didn't hesitate. "When do I start?" "January 3rd, welcome to federal service." She flew back to Colorado that night, her mind already racing with possibilities. This was bigger than the protocol, bigger than any single program. This was a chance to reshape emergency medicine at the federal level, to influence policy that would affect every hospital, every medical school, every healthcare worker in the country. But first, she had one more thing to do. On December 20th, Maya returned to Tampa for the first time since the hearing. The city felt different, or maybe she was the one who'd changed. She drove past Clearwater Memorial, which was still shuttered, federal seizure notices plastered on the doors. The building looked smaller than she remembered, almost pathetic in its emptiness. She parked outside Angela's apartment and knocked. Her former colleague answered, eyes widening in surprise. "Maya, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you before I moved to D.C., and I wanted to ask you something." They sat in Angela's small living room, tea cooling between them. "The new position comes with hiring authority," Maya said. "I need people who understand what it's like on the front lines, people who've seen the system fail and want to fix it. You interested in moving to Washington?" Angela stared at her. "You're offering me a job?" "Deputy Director of Clinical Standards. You'd help develop training protocols, oversee implementation, work directly with hospitals. It's government work, so the pay isn't amazing, but the impact would be huge." Angela's eyes filled with tears. "I stayed silent when they fired you. I should have fought harder. I should have—" "You're fighting now," Maya interrupted gently. That's what matters. Yes or no? Yes. Absolutely yes. They hugged, and Maya felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. She was building a team of people who understood that healthcare wasn't about protecting institutions. It was about protecting lives. The last stop was the cemetery on the edge of town. She hadn't planned to come here, but her feet carried her anyway. The graves were arranged in neat rows, headstones gleaming in the winter sun. She walked until she found the one she was looking for, a small marker near an oak tree. Patricia Rodriguez, 1968 to 2019. Beloved nurse, devoted mother. Mother Maya's mother had died from complications during a routine surgery. The hospital had called it an unavoidable outcome. But Maya had seen the incident report later, seen the notes about understaffing, about delays in response time, about warnings that had been ignored. Her mother had died because the system had failed. That was why Maya had become a nurse. That was why she'd refused to let Lieutenant Ethan Cross die on her table. That was why she was fighting to change everything. She knelt by the grave, tracing her mother's name with cold fingers. "I did it, Mom," she whispered. "I changed things. Not just for me, for everyone." The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and Maya let herself cry for the first time in months, not from pain, but from release. When she stood, she felt lighter. The weight of the past 6 months hadn't disappeared, but had transformed into something else. Purpose, direction, peace. On January 3rd, Maya Rodriguez walked into her new office at the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. The nameplate on her door read, Director, Emergency Response and Medical Ethics. Her team was small, just 5 people, including Angela, but they were fierce, dedicated, and ready to fight. Her first official act was to issue a directive requiring all federally funded hospitals to adopt transparent incident reporting and whistleblower protections. No more silencing nurses. No more buried safety reports. No more choosing reputation over lives. The pushback was immediate. Hospital associations complained about regulatory overreach. Conservative lawmakers called it government interference. But the public supported it overwhelmingly, and the directive stood. By March, the Critical Decision Protocol was fully implemented nationwide. The first comprehensive data review showed a 21% reduction in preventable deaths during emergency interventions. The numbers were undeniable. In April, Dr. Victor Harmon was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge called his actions a betrayal of the medical profession and a callous disregard for human life. He showed no remorse, even at sentencing. Maya didn't attend. She was too busy building the future to dwell on the past. On a warm afternoon in May, nearly a year after she'd been fired, Maya stood at a podium in front of 500 nursing students at Johns Hopkins University. They were young, idealistic, terrified of the challenges ahead. She recognized that fear. She'd lived it. "You're entering a profession that will ask everything of you," she told them. "You'll face impossible choices. You'll see systems fail. You'll be told to stay quiet, to follow orders, to prioritize protocols over people, and some of you will be punished for doing the right thing." She paused, letting the weight settle. "But here's what I need you to understand. Your voice matters. Your courage matters. When you see something wrong, speak up. When you see someone dying, act. Don't wait for permission to save a life. The system will try to break you. Don't let it." The students rose to their feet, applause thundering through the auditorium. Maya saw herself in their faces, the determination, the fear, the hope that they could make a difference. After the speech, a young student approached her, hands shaking. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm terrified of making a mistake," the student admitted. "What if I freeze? What if I'm not brave enough?" Maya took her hands. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. The night I saved Lieutenant Cross, I was terrified. But I knew that doing nothing was worse than trying and failing. You'll find that courage when you need it, I promise." The student nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." Maya watched her walk away and felt the circle complete. She'd been that student once, unsure, afraid, hoping someone would tell her it was okay to be scared. Now she was the one offering that reassurance. The cycle continued. That evening, Maya returned to her apartment in Georgetown and found a package waiting at her door. No return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a folded American flag and a handwritten note. Maya, this flag flew over our forward operating base the day you saved my life. I wanted you to have it. You're not military, but you serve the same mission, protecting those who can't protect themselves. You do it with the same courage, the same sacrifice, the same refusal to quit. You changed healthcare. You changed lives. You changed mine. Thank you will never be enough. Ethan. Maya held the flag against her chest, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Sacrifice, service, courage, all the things she'd never expected to embody but had somehow become. She hung it on her wall, directly across from her desk, where she'd see it every morning. 1 year after being fired from Clearwater Memorial, Maya Rodriguez stood in her office and looked at what she'd built. A federal program that protected healthcare workers, a protocol that saved thousands of lives, a team dedicated to fighting institutional corruption, a legacy that would outlive her. She thought about the nurse who'd been escorted out of that Tampa hospital, humiliated and broken. She thought about the helicopters descending from the sky, the metal pin to her chest, the little girl's crayon drawing still taped to her wall. She thought about her mother's grave and the promise she'd whispered there. The system that had tried to destroy her was crumbling. The people who'd punished her were facing justice, and the change she'd fought for was becoming permanent. Maya Rodriguez had lost her job for saving a life. In return, she'd gained a movement, transformed a profession, and proved that one person's courage could reshape an entire system. The hospital that fired her no longer existed. The man she saved was alive and whole. The protocols she wrote were saving lives every single day. And the nurse who'd been told she was dangerous, reckless, and unfit for the profession? She was now the most powerful voice in American healthcare. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been rewritten, and Maya Rodriguez was just getting started.